I've told this story to so many people over the years, and almost everyone thinks I'm making it up. They laugh or roll their eyes, thinking I watched too many horror movies as a kid. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that every single second of this is true. It's the kind of truth that stays in your bones, the kind that makes you double-check the locks on your doors even 20 years later. It started back when I was just a little kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old. Back then, weekends were the ultimate prize because my parents were pretty chill. They'd let me stay up way past my bedtime, camping out on the big floral living room couch and watching TV until the late-night infomercials started. There was something so peaceful about those nights. The house would be pitch black except for the flickering blue light of the television, and I felt like a king, staying up later than anyone else just because I could. It was one of those nights, probably around 2 o'clock or 3 a.m. I was right on the edge of sleep, that hazy, fuzzy state where the TV sounds start to blend into your thoughts, when a noise from outside snapped me wide awake. It wasn't a loud noise, but in the dead silence of the suburbs, it sounded like a gunshot. Creak, creak, creak. Froze. I knew that sound. It was our old-fashioned wooden porch swing, the one with the rusty chains. But here was the thing, the air was dead still that night. There wasn't even a breeze to rustle the leaves, let alone move a heavy wooden swing. My heart started thumping against my ribs, a fast, rhythmic drumming. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to bury my head under the blanket, but curiosity is a powerful thing when you're a kid. I rolled off the couch and crawled on my hands and knees toward the big bay windows. I moved as slowly as a shadow, making sure the floorboards didn't groan. I reached up and peeled back the edge of the heavy curtain just an inch, just enough to peek out. Sitting right there, not even 5 feet away on the other side of the glass, was a woman. She looked to be in her 50s, with matted hair and a vacant stare. She was wearing nothing but a thin, pale nightgown. But it wasn't white anymore. It was completely soaked, stained a deep, heavy crimson. It was lathpath in blood, and in her right hand, she was gripping a massive kitchen knife, the kind you use to carve a turkey, and it glinted under the yellow porch light every time the swing moved forward. I didn't just get scared, I felt my entire world tilt. It was a physical shock, like being hit by a wave of ice water. I didn't even think. I turned and sprinted into my parents' room, screaming at the top of my lungs. I was hysterical, gasping for air, trying to tell them what was out there, but I was so terrified that I couldn't form words. I was just making these raw, guttural sounds of pure panic. My dad woke up instantly, but he wasn't scared. He was annoyed. He saw me shaking and crying, but when I finally choked out that there was a bloody lady with a knife on the porch, his face hardened. He thought I'd watched something I shouldn't have or was having a vivid nightmare. He told me to grow up and go back to bed. But I couldn't. I was trembling so hard I could barely stand. I refused to move, crying and begging him not to go near the door. Finally, he had enough. My dad was a no-nonsense kind of guy, and he wanted to prove to me once and for all that I was being ridiculous. He snatched my arm, not to be mean but to be firm, and literally dragged me toward the front door. I was fighting him the whole way, kicking at the carpet, screaming, "No, Dad, don't. She's there." But he was determined to show me the porch was empty. We got to the hallway. He reached for the deadbolt. I was practically climbing up his leg to stop him. He unlocked it, swung the heavy wooden door wide open and started to say, "See? There's nothing to..." And then the world stopped. To this day, I have never seen a human face change so fast. The skepticism, the annoyance, the dad authority, it all evaporated in a split second. The look of absolute, bone-chilling fear and shock on my father's face is something that is burned into my brain. Because as the door opened, that woman, sitting right there, slowly turned her head. She stared both of us dead in the eyes, her face a mask of madness, and she slowly, deliberately stood up with that knife. My dad didn't hesitate. He slammed the door shut with a force that shook the whole house and bolted it. The silence was gone. He yelled for my mom to call 911 immediately while he ran to the back to get his 12-gauge shotgun. He came back to the door, his hand steady now but his face still pale. He cracked the door just an inch, only enough to stick the barrel of the gun through, and shouted for her to stay back. He asked her what the hell she was doing. Her voice. Man, her voice was the worst part. It wasn't a scream. It was flat, eerily calm, like she was talking about the weather. She just whispered, "Somebody killed my husband." But it wasn't me. When my dad told her the police were on their way, something in her snapped. She freaked out, gripped that knife tight, and bolted off the porch, disappearing into the darkness of the tree line. Now, my dad knew my uncle lived right next door. And let's just say my uncle was a bit of a wild card. Dad grabbed the phone and warned him, "There's a woman with a knife, covered in blood, headed your way. Be ready." My uncle didn't call the cops. He just grabbed his own shotgun and stepped out onto his dark porch. A few minutes later, he saw her creeping through the shadows of his yard. He didn't yell for help. He just leveled the barrel at her and growled, "Keep moving, bitch." She must have realized she'd picked the wrong house, because she turned and ran again. The police caught her about 15 minutes later. She was in the middle of trying to kick in the door of another neighbor down the street. We found out later, through the neighborhood grapevine, that it was a total mental breakdown. She'd gone off her meds, had a massive blowout with her husband, and tried to attack him. When he managed to shove her out of the house and lock her out, she used the knife on herself, either to try and end it or to make it look like he was the one who attacked her. The police never actually came back to give us a formal statement, so we were left with the fragments. But for me, the story didn't need a formal ending. I never watch TV in that living room late at night again. Every time I see a porch swing now, I don't see a place to relax. I see a woman in a red-stained gown, waiting for the door to open. One of my male friends told me this story, so I am going to explain this from his perspective. It was February of 2010 when my wife and I finally closed on our first home. You know that feeling, the keys feel heavy in your hand. And for the first time in your life, you feel like you've actually made it. We fell in love with the place the second we saw the listing. It was a beautiful house, relatively new, with polished floors and that new house smell that makes everything feel clean and full of potential. For the first few weeks, we were living in a dream. We spent every evening after work painting the walls eggshell white or forest green, ordering furniture, and planning out where every single picture frame would go. We were so busy building our future that we didn't realize we were sharing our present with a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost. It was much, much worse. The honeymoon phase with the house lasted exactly 1 month. Then the atmosphere started to sour. It began with a kind of small, irritating things that you blame on your spouse. I'd be looking for my car keys on the kitchen counter where I knew I'd left them, only to find them sitting on the floor of the upstairs hallway. Or I'd leave a half-finished soda in the living room and find the empty can in the guest room trash. My wife and I started having these tiny, tense arguments. "Why did you move my book?" "I didn't move it, you must have left it there." We were gaslighting each other without even knowing it. Then came the settling noises. Every night, like clockwork, the house would groan. Now, I'm a rational guy. I know that wood expands in the heat and contracts in the cold. I knew that a new house needs time to find its center. But these weren't just clicks and pops. These were heavy, rhythmic creaks. Creak, creak. It sounded exactly like someone was pacing the hallway upstairs while we sat in the living room. I'd look up at the ceiling, my heart skipping a beat, and my wife would look at me with this nervous smile and say, "Boy, this house sure is noisy, isn't it?" I'd laugh and nod. But inside, I was starting to feel a cold, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The breaking point, the night that changed our lives, happened on a Tuesday. It was a mundane, normal evening. We were in the kitchen together, the light from the overhead stove casting long shadows across the tile. The way our house was built, the staircase was tucked right next to the kitchen entrance. It acted like a megaphone. Any sound from the second floor would travel down the stairs and hit the kitchen with terrifying clarity. I was standing at the sink, the water running full blast as I rinsed some dishes for dinner. The sound of the rushing water filled the room. Then I turned the handle. The water stopped, and in that sudden, deafening silence, it happened. Cough. It wasn't a cough from outside. It wasn't a neighbor. It was a dry, raspy human cough that came from exactly 10 feet away, right at the top of our stairs. My heart didn't just race, it stopped. I felt the blood literally drain out of my face, leaving my skin cold and clammy. I looked at my wife. She was holding a plate, her knuckles white, her eyes wide and glassy with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the silence of our own home. We knew in that moment that there was a third person in that house. I reached out and gripped the handle of the sharpest chef's knife in our butcher block. My hand was shaking so violently I had to use both hands to steady it. My wife reached for her phone and dialed 911. Her voice a terrified whisper as she told the operator, "Someone is upstairs. Please send someone now." I walked to the base of the stairs. I didn't want to go up, but I had to protect her. I stood there, staring up into the darkness of the second-floor landing. And then I heard it, the heavy, familiar creak of the floorboards. But this time I could see the shadow move. Someone was up there, shifting their weight, watching me from the darkness. The police arrived in what felt like hours, but it was only minutes. 2 officers burst through the front door, guns drawn, their heavy boots thudding on our new floors. They signaled for us to stay back, but I couldn't help it. I followed a few paces behind them, my knife still in my hand. The search was agonizingly slow. We cleared the first bedroom. The officer kicked the door open, his flashlight cutting through the room. "Police! Come out with your hands up." Nothing. Just our half-unpacked boxes. We checked the guest bathroom. We checked under the beds. Every time a door opened, I expected a lunging figure with a weapon. Finally, we reached my home office at the very end of the hall. This was my space, where I spent hours on my PC. We searched the entire room. We checked the closet, behind the curtains, even under the desk. Nothing. I felt this strange, hollow sense of relief. I started to think maybe I was crazy. Maybe the cough was the pipes. Maybe the shadow was just my imagination playing tricks in the dim light. I turned to the officer to apologize for wasting his time. I opened my mouth to speak, and that's when the world fell apart. Clack. The sound came from directly above our heads. Not from the hallway, not from another room, but from the ceiling of the office closet. In that closet there was a small, square wooden hatch, the access to the crawlspace attic. The officer froze. He looked at me, then looked at the hatch. He reached up and pulled the folding ladder down. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of the ladder unfolding felt like a death knell. He pointed his gun into the black hole above and shouted one last time, "This is the police. Come down now or we will come up." Dead silence. The officer began to climb, one slow step at a time. I watched his boots disappear into the hatch, then his waist, then his head. I stood in that closet, my breath hitched in my throat, watching the flickering light of his flashlight bounce around the dark attic. Suddenly, the officer's voice dropped an octave. It was low, dangerous, and filled with shock. "Hands up. Let me see your hands. Don't move a muscle." He found him. Tucked into the very far corner of our attic, curled up in the pink fiberglass insulation like some kind of human animal, was a man in his late 40s. He was covered in dust. His clothes were filthy and stained with sweat, and his eyes. I'll never forget his eyes. They were wide, unblinking, and completely hollow. He had been kneeling there in the dark, looking directly at the hatch, waiting for us to find him. The police dragged him down the ladder. He was limp like a doll. He didn't fight, he didn't argue, and he didn't say a single word. He just stared at the floor as they led him through our beautiful painted hallway and out into the night. We found out later that he was a homeless man who had seen the house while it was vacant and on the market. A realtor had forgotten to lock the back sliding door after a showing, and he had simply walked in. When he heard us moving in, he didn't leave. He just went higher. He had been living in our attic for 30 days. 30 days of him listening to our private conversations. 30 days of him hearing us laugh, hearing us argue, and hearing us breathe. He told the police that he would wait until we were both at work. Then he'd come down, use our bathroom, eat small bits of our food, and move our things around just to see if we'd notice. Later we sold that house.